depending on the diet that somebody has done, if somebody has been very low carb or higher fat protein for a considerable amount of time, they can actually produce decreased insulin sensitivity. So they actually will produce some insulin resistance in their system. So we know that with keto-based people that basically eliminate carbohydrates, as soon as they reintroduce them, they actually have significantly high levels of blood sugar, almost in a diabetic state. And that's not going to be a lasting. Their body can kind of recover from that. But initially, when somebody does come from that low carb lifestyle, they're going to have higher than normal blood sugars. Their body doesn't know how to respond to all this additional carbohydrates.
Welcome to The Body Never Lies. I'm your host, Leela Lutz. Each week, myself and experts from around the world help you uncover the secret ways your body communicates with you to empower you in your own individual health journey. Hey, Deering, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I actually can't believe I haven't had you on one podcast yet.
I know, right? Well, I'm super excited to be with you today.
This is so good.
I know it's so early in Australia right now, so I appreciate this early time period.
Well, like I said, I wouldn't be able to have all my amazing American friends on here if I didn't get up super early.
Yeah.
And I'm a morning person, so it's cool. It's cool. I really want to talk today about carbohydrates with you because you wrote an amazing book called How to Heal Your Metabolism. And I think it came from, because we both came from the Czech way of eating, and because we're both Czech practitioners. And I don't recall, it's interesting, right? Because I actually have had a lot of Czech practitioners as clients and helped them resolve a lot of issues. And I don't see, and with Paul's work, he talks a lot about metabolic typing, which we can talk a little bit about today at some point, I'm sure, because it's still relevant in some ways. But I think the biggest thing was we were taught about fats, carbs, proteins, but we were taught not to log because logging is stressful and that we should use our intuition more and look at your plate. And so I don't think there was anything wrong in that method, but a key part of it, I think, is when you don't log, you don't understand exactly how much carbohydrate is in a food, how much protein is in a food, how much fat is in a food. So you're guessing, right? And then you sort of lean towards sort of biases where you're a protein type or you're a carb type, and then you focus more on those foods and you sort of forget about the other foods. And I think for me, especially, I was a protein type, and I say that in air quotes.
And as I was too. Yep.
Yeah. And as a default of that, I ended up eating quite a high fat, low carbohydrate diet until I actually went back and went, oh, you know what? I actually need to use my nutrition knowledge and apply it to that and see what I was eating. You know, I'd look at my plate and go, that looks sufficient. It's clean. But when I look back at photos, it's like, wow, it was really low carb. And I think that really explains why I have so many issues, had so many issues subsequently, and why I end up working with so many Czech practitioners to teach them. So, so you wrote this great book about how to heal your metabolism and what I really learned from that, and I still recommend it to clients, is how to reintegrate these foods so they're more in balance.
Well, just going back to the Czech Institute and learning his concepts, and when you go back to the metabolic typing, for people that don't understand, usually we're like 3 different types. You were a protein type, carb type, or a mixed type. And they would have a series of maybe 30 or 40 questions you answered based on how do you respond or think you respond to your certain foods. And then based on what your number was, that's what you were. And I always believed, certainly, that if I eat too many carbohydrates, I would just gain weight. And maybe that's why I thought I wasn't carb type. And if I certainly reduced my carbs and I ate a ton more protein, then I wouldn't gain weight. And I based everything on my health on gaining weight, right? That was my metric. My most important metric was the weight. So I based every dietary choice on what the scale was doing and really oblivious to anything else as far as that maybe my food was affecting how my sleep was, or my energy was, or my cycle was, or anything else. It was just basically, if I worked out and I ate and I was maintaining my weight, then I was good. And I think in your 20s and 30s, you can probably have that approach and be pretty good. I mean, the food quality that Czech certainly recommend was fairly good quality, non-processed foods, organic and all these things. So it wasn't a bad diet. I just think as you get older and as you learn about how your system runs more effectively and how actually your metabolism functions, your viewpoint will start to shift, because then you start to look and go, wait a minute, I'm lean, but yet I'm not feeling great. My energy levels are down. I mean, my period is kind of wonky. My sleep is kind of wonky. My skin feels a little off. All these other things start occurring. And now you're having to rethink, because wait, this is all a product or result of how well my body is producing energy. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not producing energy effectively, then I'm going to start having symptoms. Okay, well, what is the best source of energy? Well, carbohydrates are, because you can actually utilize them quicker. They're more efficient. They come with all the minerals and so forth. Then if I'm reducing those, then I can see why I was having problems. That was kind of where I got to. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm like limiting my best source of fuel. Maybe that's why I have all these issues. This cooler temperature. I was cold. I don't know how you were. My pulse was pretty low. I was more of a long distance athlete at the time as well. So there was a lot of things that I considered that were now changing my perspective of how I actually thought I was healthy, and also at the time when I kind of came into this, I found my weight was actually starting to go up. Like all the things that I was doing just weren't even working any longer. So I was just kind of hitting this wall and not understanding why, until I saw the lens of how I viewed health differently. And then I could see it. And then I was like, oh, maybe it's because I'm eating 100 grams of carbs a day. And then again, and as when people kind of find this approach, as I did, I just started eating a ton more carbohydrates. And I changed literally my whole diet, which probably increased my caloric intake of what I was consuming, maybe 500-600 calories additionally a day. So there was weight gain that was established, or that occurred, in which I think a lot of things like that happen to people when they find this approach. They just all of a sudden eat the foods and they're more calories than what they were eating. And so that will usually come with some additional weight gain.
Well, let's talk about the weight and gluten, carbs and sugar. And I think because this is like you said, it's everyone's biggest concern. I definitely ate less carbohydrates. I ate less carbohydrates because I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in my 20s, and somehow got onto the thought that sugar was bad for your thyroid and for autoimmune conditions. And we can talk about how people come to that a bit later. But I did find that I was lean. It was easier to stay lean when I was off the carbohydrates too. So it reinforces that belief that you have.
Really?
How does that work? How do people come to that?
It's basically energy balance, right? I think when people think, oh, I'm going to increase my metabolism, and so if I just eat a bunch of carbs, my metabolism will increase and I'm just going to lose a lot of weight. That's, I think, the belief somebody has when they kind of come into the approach, because you're like, well, I'm healing my metabolism. If it's increasing, why am I not burning more calories and just dropping weight? Well, first off, we have to establish where your caloric maintenance is initially, right? If you're eating whatever you're eating right now, and if you're restricting carbohydrates, you might be on a somewhat low calorie diet. So let's just say you're eating fat and protein and a little bit of carbs, and you're eating 1,500 calories. Now, all of a sudden, you decide, oh, I'm now going to introduce a bunch of carbohydrates in. And now, all of a sudden, you're eating 2,000 calories. Well, it's going to take your body time to adapt to an increased caloric intake. And so it's initially going to be like, well, you just gave us all these additional calories that we can't use yet, so we're just going to store them. And so that's where the additional weight gain initially comes. Now, depending on the diet that somebody has done, if somebody has been very low carb or higher fat protein for a considerable amount of time, they can actually produce decreased insulin sensitivity. So they actually will produce some insulin resistance in their system. So we know that with keto-based people that basically eliminate carbohydrates, as soon as they reintroduce them, they actually have significantly high levels of blood sugar, almost in a diabetic state. And that's not going to be a lasting. Their body can kind of recover from that. But initially, when somebody does come from that low-carb lifestyle, they're going to have higher than normal blood sugars. Their body doesn't know how to respond to all this additional carbohydrates. So one approach is to kind of add them in quite slowly. So usually, and I'm sure you do this too, it's like, look, figure out how many calories you're consuming now, and then we're slowly going to change them. And maybe we just decrease the fat a little bit and add a little bit more carbs. We just add additional carbs in quite slowly so we can allow your body to adapt to this new energy increase. Because normally what happens is those people do feel better. All of a sudden they're like, oh, I do have more energy, or I'm sleeping better, or my hair is growing better, or my workouts feel better. But if they go too fast, yes, you can have this kind of increased weight increase because you just have too many calories than your body can use right now. And that can change as you kind of shift your body's usage of fuel, but that isn't immediate. That does take some time. So that's normally why people are gaining weight. It's not because carbs are generally fat. They're not, for the most part. If you had a 100% carbohydrate diet, if you ate into excess, most of those carbs would not get stored as fat. They would just get stored as glycogen. It's normally if somebody is eating an abundance of carbohydrates and a good amount of fat in their diet, then now they've eaten an excess of calories. And it's usually the fat in their diet that is converting to fat and not the carbohydrates. That makes sense. So carbs don't generally convert to fat. And I think actually when we've checked fat in people's tissue, it's basically the fat in your fat is primarily coming from dietary fats. It's not coming from carbohydrates converting, unless you're just eating in massive excess. But we can store a good 2,000 calories of carbohydrates on our body without it converting to fat in the form of glycogen. And that's the other part of weight gain. So weight is just not fat gain. Weight can be water. Weight can be glycogen. Weight can be fibrous material in your GI. Weight can be muscle. There are numerous things that actually will add weight to a body. It's not just fat. And so if somebody has been on a low-carb diet, then maybe their glycogen stores are quite depleted, and now you're going to consume all these carbs. So now you're going to restore your glycogen stores, which is weight. And for every gram of glycogen you store, you're going to store about 3 grams of water. So now you're going to have excess glycogen. Well, not excess, but you're going to have glycogen stores, and you'll also store more water in your tissue. And that is going to look like weight. And that's why people that literally go on a no-carb diet, within 24 hours can lose 5 or 6 pounds of weight. We're like, oh my God, this thing is magic. I lost all this weight overnight. Because yeah, you depleted your glycogen, your water stores. That's what you did. So we have to understand what we're measuring. Now, of course, some people, if they just consume an excess of calories, and I'm sure you've seen it too, when people start this approach, they're like, I got drinking whole milk and cheese. And they're ingesting more carbohydrates. So that when you actually have them, and going back to food logging, when you actually have them record that, they're like, oh, I am actually consuming more carbs, but I'm consuming like 40% fat. Like you look at their breakdown and they have a good amount of fat in their diet. Now, I'm not saying that somebody can't safely have 40% fat in their diet, but if you're flipping from a low-carb lifestyle, 1,500 calories, and all of a sudden you've eaten 2,000 calories and have moderate level of carbohydrate, but still have fairly high level of fat and an excess calories, you're going to gain weight. So the answer is figure out food log, find out what your calorie balance is, how many calories you're eating right now. So you know when you start making changes to maybe keeping the same calorie intake and change some of your metrics, maybe a little lower fat or a little higher carb, or just start adding the carbs in very slowly. You know, if you're doing 1,500, then you do 1,600. And then in a week or two, you do 1,700. And you go slow and steady. As you start to feel better, you can start adding more and more. But if you do it all at once, your body's not going to be able to kind of adapt to that immediately.
So it is interesting because with some of these people who are coming to me and they're like, oh my God, I gained so much weight from going pro-metabolic. Now you know why that's happening to people. And they are in this pre-diabetic state. So let's settle this here, Kate. Do carbs cause diabetes?
No, not directly. And here's the analogy I want to give people, because every time I say that, they're like, I eat carbs and that's how I got this way. And when I do carbs, my blood sugar rises, my A1C rises. I'm like, okay. Imagine your blood system is like a pipe system. And let's just say the pipe is clogged and you all of a sudden add water to the pipe. Well, that pipe's going to overflow and create a problem, right? Well, it's the same kind of thing in your blood system. Now, let me go back. If you have a clogged pipe, you put water in it, the water overflows. Is water creating the overflow, or is it the clogged pipe creating the overflow? So the water's overflowing, but it's not creating the problem. The clogged pipe is creating the problem, right? So go back to your blood system. When you have sugar into your blood, the sugar isn't creating it to elevate and stay elevated. Something is happening within your system or your cells that's inhibiting the sugar getting into your cell, or there's a backup in your cell, or something's happening, and that's why your blood sugar is staying elevated. It's not inherently the sugar itself, just like it's not the water in the clogged pipe that's creating the problem. So it's the same kind of system. It's a similar analogy, and if you can think of it that way, you can understand just because it's the sugar that's elevated, and the same thing, just because the water is overflowing doesn't mean that's actually creating the problem. It's just the thing that's overflowing or elevated. Does that make sense?
100%.
Yeah. So then the question is, well, why is the individual having a hard time getting the sugar into the cell? Or what is inhibiting that process? Because a lot of things can be going on that can create that system being backed up. It's not just that it's sugar. Now, does that mean they should just go and consume copious amounts of sugar and go, well, it's not sugar? No, for the same reason you shouldn't blast the water if you have a clogged pipe. You're still going to get a backup. So the question is, you got to kind of try to fix what is backing it up. And then there's a lot of different reasons for that, right? So one is that a blood sugar or elevated blood sugar can be a result of a very stressed system. Because when you have elevated stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, glucagon, the primary mechanism and why those things are elevated is to elevate your blood sugar. So those are already going off to elevate your blood sugar levels. And if those are getting poor feedback, meaning for whatever reason, they're just constantly still elevated, and we see that in diabetics, then that mechanism isn't working properly, so that when you actually ingest sugar and those are still elevated, you just get higher than normal blood sugar levels. So certainly addressing stress in your life, whether it's external or whatever, is very helpful, but also addressing the stress in your system, because when your system is stressed or when you don't have enough nutrients or food to meet your demands, you're going to have a stress system. So for some people, that means, well, let's just start eating regular meals throughout the day, right? Or let's just start making sure you have enough fuel in the morning to take care of yourself for the beginning part of your day, to get yourself out of this stressed cycle, right? Because, and kind of let me clarify this again, because I know it gets a little bit confusing. You have stress hormones, and we all talk about stress hormones, but literally their main job is to elevate your blood sugar. That's what they're there to do, right? So cortisol, adrenaline, and glucagon, which a lot of people don't talk about, their job is to elevate your blood sugar when your blood sugar gets too low. And they do that to keep you alive, period. Stress hormones are very important. You would die without them. So they're there to elevate your blood sugar because you don't have anything coming in to elevate it externally. Because the other thing that can elevate your blood sugar is sugar, carbs. That elevates your blood sugar. And when we have enough fuel coming in, we don't have the stress response, or we mitigate it a lot, right? And we don't, and again, the stress response is a fine and a healthy response. It's there, again, to keep us alive, but we just don't want to be constantly in it. Right? We want to be in a healthy place where we actually have good thyroid function, where we have the ability to use the fuel that we're bringing in and then using that to run our systems. We only get the stress response when we have a lack of fuel coming in, when we don't have the resources and our body says, well, let's break down some tissue or release glycogen into the blood so that you stay alive, because your body is constantly in the need of fuel. There's never a time or a break where it's like, well, you don't need any right now. Or we're sleeping. We don't need fuel while we're sleeping. You absolutely do. All the time, 24 hours a day. The systems in your body are running off of fuel. And that fuel that is being converted and produced into energy, that's how your body runs. And if you have a lack of it, or you don't have any coming in, you die. So that's why you have these mechanisms and these stress hormones there and available, so that when you have a lack of fuel coming in, they can use your own resources, right? So with that said, that is a good thing. However, in a system that's under chronic stress, the mechanisms don't work as well. And what we see is specifically like glucagon, which is the first hormone that's elevated to help get your blood sugar elevated. That hormone will actually stay high in diabetic people. So even when they're eating, because normally when you ingest food, that actually mitigates the stress response and it dampens it, because they're like, oh, now you're getting carbohydrates in. We don't have to break your tissue down to elevate that. So we are going to lower the stress hormones. And that's why sugar or carbs are actually anti-stress, because they lower and dampen the stress response. But in somebody that has metabolic syndrome or diabetes, that doesn't work properly. The energy system isn't working and those things stay elevated. And so we have to work on trying to mitigate some of the other stressors in their life to try to see if we can dampen that system, meaning that's just trying to like reduce stress in their life, meaning trying to eat more balanced meals. Maybe initially the meals aren't that high in carbohydrate, or they are lower in fat and more high in carbohydrate, depending on how the body feels, because that sometimes works. How much have I lost you here?
No, I'm good.
Okay,
I'm good. I'm just like, well, she's so good. What is that though? How much does protein play a role in it too? Because that is another mistake I see with people. It's just high carb, high fat.
So protein certainly is needed, right? We need that as our structure. It's there for our hormones. I mean, protein is our structural macronutrient. As far as how does it relate to blood sugar, is that when you have enough protein in your meals, it will slow down the speed of how the carbohydrates get into your blood. So we have ways to dampen how, like when you look at like blood sugar levels and you go, well, I get spikes, right? People always talk about their blood sugar spikes. And it's like, well, how can we mitigate a blood sugar spike? And then I'm not even saying a blood sugar spike is that horrible, depending on, right, the context of that and what somebody means by that. You can usually get 30 or 40 points from a meal and it's totally healthy and fine. We're not looking for flatline blood sugar levels. That doesn't make any sense. It's usually, obviously, if they're getting, into those very high numbers, whether you're getting an 80-point response, or I think you guys measure it differently over in Australia. But when you have protein in the meal and even fat in the meal and you have carbohydrates, it's going to slow down how quickly the carbs get into your blood. So for those people, if they actually can manage blood sugar well, the blood sugar won't have a big spike because it's going to slow down. And so you'll just get a little bit far than a huge amount at one time, right? If you have like 100% carbohydrate meal, that would produce more of a spike per se, because it's all going to come in together, right? There's nothing slowing it down. There's nothing to kind of mitigate how quickly that carbohydrates get in, unless it was a ton of fiber in that carbohydrate meal. But you will get more at once, right? So it's like, if you have all of it at one time going into, right, through your stomach, into your small intestine, into the blood, it's going to show up pretty quickly. If you have a lot of protein or fat, it won't come in as quickly. And that's why usually if you have protein with your meal, you usually feel more satiety for a longer period of time. And that's why, having protein, fat, carbs usually will produce more satiety for somebody, and they aren't as hungry as if they just had like 100% carbohydrate meal, right? But it depends. So the other part of that is not just what you're ingesting, but also, as I was talking about before, what is the state of your health? Because if your health is in a chronic state of stress and your hormones aren't acting appropriately, and one of the things that occurs too in that high stress state, because again, those hormones are there to try to increase your blood sugar. At the same time, specifically cortisol, is going to be breaking down your fat and dumping that into the blood to be used as fuel, right? Because at that point, your body's just saying, look, we've got to keep everything running. We need fuel sources. Sugar is going to be one of them, but we're also going to use fat because that's readily available and you have a ton of that stored in your body. And we're going to dump both those things into the blood system. The problem with that in the chronic state is, and we see this also in diabetics, is they actually have a lot of free fatty acids or broke down triglycerides from your tissue in their blood. And when you have an excessive amount of free fatty acids in your blood, when you ingest sugar or you break down tissue to produce sugar, that high amount of fat in your blood tends to block, which is, again, I was talking about blocks before, tends to block the cell's ability to uptake sugar, meaning that fat is going to inhibit that response. So the blood sugar stays elevated for much longer and at higher amounts. So that excess fat in the blood can be a problem. And so for some individuals, if they eat meals with too much fat and carbohydrate, that additional fat just seems to exacerbate the problem, and they have even higher blood sugar numbers. So for those individuals, sometimes reducing the fat, and this is why we have tons of research on low-fat diets, and that means literally under 20%, and some of them are even under 10% fat, literally can fix people's diabetic numbers because they've removed all of the fat. And so when they do ingest the carbs, there's not that much of a competition and the carbs are able to get into the cells.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So we know that with like Kempner rice diet, we know that with the McDougall starch diet, and there's other dietary approaches that they've done that have shown very, very low fat diets are very therapeutic for some of these metabolic disorders. The problem is in certainly the higher fat keto, whatever schools of thought, they definitely slam, like they say, the lower fat approach because of history. They're like, look, when we all of a sudden took all the fat out of everybody's diet and we made it like all these carbohydrates, and look, everyone just got fatter. But the truth is we never really ate less fat during that time period. We actually changed the fats that we were eating. We went from the more saturated, we went to the more polyunsaturated or unsaturated fat. And ultimately, we just ate more calories. So not only did we eat more garbage carbohydrates, but we still kept the fat the same. And we just ate more. And of course, we all gained weight, right? Everyone started to gain weight at that point in time. So there was a lot of different variables that will usually occur when somebody gains weight. But traditionally thinking, if all calories are equal, and if we eat the same amount of calories, in some individuals, going lower fat makes them more insulin sensitive, so that when they do eat carbohydrates, they respond much better. And I've seen that countless times with clients when we've actually monitored their blood sugar levels.
100%. And it doesn't mean, right, that that's the way you're going to eat forever. Like I know for me, I dropped down to about 20% fat, but gradually over time, I'm back up at 30%, and that definitely works better for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Is nothing is forever. Sometimes you do something on a therapeutic level because it helps fix the problem, and then you go back and incorporate whether it's more fat or whatever it is, or if you've been high fat and even incorporating more carbohydrates. It isn't just going from A to Z, don't go from high fat to high carb in like a split second. It's finding kind of how you should maneuver through that process the most effective way. And I think a lot of people that kind of are coming from a keto or a higher carb, or a higher fat type diet, when they do this, and this is, it's not necessarily their fault because it's normally how we approach diets. We just go all in. And I will tell you that that's what I did when I found this approach. I went all in. I gained weight. I had some health markers that went kind of wonky on me. And then I kind of figured out my way through it. I don't think you need to do that. I think you can kind of go to a slower approach. But to do a slower approach, you need to be meticulous with kind of collecting data on yourself so that you know what you're doing, that makes the path more clear for you. If not, you're just going to be kind of guessing through this process, which might not be the best avenue for a lot of people.
And it does take a lot of work to do that, and I think that's what turns people off. But You know, and some of my clients are literally like, I've had some people come to work with me and eat 40 grams of carbohydrate a day.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, we got to get it back up somewhere to at least 180, right? And then from there, we have to work out what your carbohydrate needs are. And it's literally depends on the person, depends on their stress levels. Sometimes you'll say, well, let's increase your carbohydrates by 50 grams a week, or 50 calories a week. Sometimes it's 100 calories a week.
Yep.
Sometimes it's 100 calories and you have to stay on that for a month because you have to get used to putting those carbs evenly throughout the day. Be used to what are carbohydrates, you know. It's very individual. And I think like with all this work that I've done, I've never used the same approach with the same two people because everybody's so different.
100%. Yeah, I think you have a general framework of what you're trying to achieve, but you know, when you understand, look, your nervous system only can utilize carbohydrates unless you are in ketosis and when they'll use ketones. But even then, it still needs carbohydrates. You're never using 100% ketones. Ketones aren't necessarily a bad source of energy, but usually to get into ketosis, I mean, you literally have to almost be starving or completely, you know, very, very, very low carbohydrates. So it's not usually the best way to get there. And that's why it's not a long-term, in my opinion, dietary approach. But I lost you.
I had a full-on fight between my cat and my dog. You guys on Instagram see my cat and my dog. They love to rumble. They're rumbling under my feet. You guys got to go. Your time's out.
100%.
It's a slow process and it takes a while. And that's hard for people, right? Because normally people who realize that they're deficient in carbohydrate have gone all in with I just take everything out, and it's so drastic and it's never been strategic. It's quite hard to actually come at it with a strategy. You know, I just want to say that to people. It's not easy.
No, now I just remember my thought. What I'm saying is that nervous system needs carbohydrates, right? So if you don't give yourself carbohydrates, your body will produce its own to try to run that system. And that's why when a lot of people, and this is what I see with people that have been keto or very low carb for a long period of time, they go through a very stressful time and their body does not respond appropriately because they're already in that slight stress space. Because here's the thing, when you are keto or very low carbohydrate, your body has higher levels of your initial blood sugar elevator, glucagon. And so you're already partially in that stress space. And so if you have more stress, it usually just pushes them over. And that's when they all seem to hit a wall. At least that's in my experience, and things go bad for them because their body just doesn't have the fuel to deal with the madness, because that's what your nervous system, your brain, everything's going to function on. And it's a huge glucose consumer. And then, of course, you know, your muscles will prefer carbohydrates. They want quick fuel, and carbohydrates are your quickest source of fuel. It takes much longer for your body to utilize fat as fuel. It does carbohydrates. Carbs go right into your blood system. Fat does not. Fat goes through your lymphatic system, so it takes a lot longer. It can be utilized, but it's certainly not quick, right? If you need to sate, your brain wants glucose. That's what's going to use. So limiting it, and that's why a lot of people, when you see them in perimenopause or menopause, they all get brain fog, they get all these other weird issues. And a lot of the time, it's just because these people are not consuming enough carbohydrates, because now they believe they don't respond to them well, that carbs make them fat. And on some level, they've probably created some level of intolerance in their system. And the high fat or, you know, the mismatching of high stress hormones aren't the only thing. A little, you know, gut dysbiosis, high endotoxin, that can certainly mess up your blood sugars numbers as well. Nutrient deficiencies can also mess up your blood sugar numbers. There, you know, low vitamin D can mess up your blood sugar numbers. Not enough magnesium. There's a lot of nutrients, if you aren't regulated with, can affect your blood sugar numbers. So to just be like, cut carbs and that's going to fix everything, seems like an illogical approach when there are numerous variables that could be contributing to your blood sugar. So that's why I kind of like this approach of like investigating it on all different levels. because although cutting carbs will initially make things look better, certainly on labs, and you might even feel better, long term, it's not the ideal approach for your health. And I think specifically for women, because we are far more sensitive to stress than men. And I think a lot of the women that are preaching this approach, and what I do, and I follow them on Instagram, when they start getting into their 40s and plus, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Because in your 30s and 20s, I feel like you can do these approaches quite safely. But to get later in life as a woman and go low carb, I think is going to be a disaster.
I think it's really interesting too, because I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of people on Instagram, women our age, a bit older, talking about perimenopause and how awful their symptoms are. And it's almost like now we've normalized, like we never talked about menopause before. It was this hush-hush topic. And now everyone's talking about it, but we're normalizing the pain and suffering of it.
Or I think maybe they're normalizing it to say, here it is, take my supplement, my product, get on menopausal hormonal therapy, whatever, and that will fix all these symptoms that are just normal to have during this time period. They're like, nobody talks about it, right? Because this is all normal for perimenopause, and here are the remedies for it. And I'm like, actually, none of that's normal.
No.
And like, you don't have to have any of that. And if you learn to kind of regulate your system, like perimenopause and menopause are just like another stresses to the system that we have to learn to handle and be able to mitigate. And you can with dietary approaches. You don't need necessarily hormonal approach. And I'm not going to down anyone that does it. I get it. I know people that are on it and it makes them feel better. Get it. Could they have gone a different approach and tried to eat differently and attend to their stressors? They could. That might be a longer and it's a more, as you say, challenging approach to kind of do that. It's a lot easier to just get on hormone replacement therapy. And when you are probably, a mom and having kids and having a job, and I know I feel for women these days because they have 50 different hats. It didn't used to be like that. But because you're being pulled in 50 different directions, your body's going to get dysregulated quicker and you're not going to feel as good. And when the diet and the nutrition and the food available is crappy and everything we have going on right now, you're going to get dysregulated quicker. And so how do you manage that? Can you do it with diet? You absolutely can. I've seen it countless times. When we get someone to eat regularly, high nutrient foods, support their GI system, try to, whatever may be going on there, certainly address that system, figure out maybe why they're not dealing with the carbohydrates as well. When we do that, their system will auto-regulate. Meaning if they're having hot flashes or night sweats or sleep issues or energy, these all do improve.
And let's just touch on some of the points of what is actually stressful, because some people will say, well, there's nothing stressful in my life. My life is great. But then it might be their exercise routine or their food routine. And then other points, I find with women a lot, I do a lot of chatting with women about taking time for yourself and delegating. Just the simple parts of not taking everything on yourself and how stressful that is. Because I don't know about you guys listening, but when I do that, I sit there and I have this internal dialogue that is not healthy. And that's from years of generations of, Indian and Sri Lankan women who didn't speak, didn't do anything. And then all of a sudden you get all this privilege and you don't know what to do with it almost, without clearing your past trauma. It's actually like saying, asking my husband for help because he's actually a really nice guy. I just asked him, but he's not a mind reader.
Well, so I like to go back into like the Hans Selye's work, and Hans Selye was like the master of the stress. He talked about the stress response, and he defined it as literally any time the demands on your body are more than your body has the capacity to keep up with, you would elicit a stress response. So if we look at it like on that level, and that would make us believe that any sort of stress that increases demand, it doesn't matter if it's mental, physical, emotional, your thoughts, a workout, whatever, If it's asking more from you than you have the energy to produce, you will have the same biological stress response. Doesn't matter, right? So when we go, and so if you're sitting here and having stressful thoughts, right? Sitting here worrying all day long, well, you're activating your nervous system. That's increasing your body's ability to utilize energy because now your heart rate's elevating. You know, we've all felt that. Just worry, right? We can feel everything going. So when your heart rate goes, that's needing more fuel now. And if you don't have it available, if you don't have any glucose stored on you, or if you don't have any, then the body's going to elicit a stress response to keep up with that. And so that's why it's really important to kind of figure out, well, what is my energy balance? Like, how much fuel does my body need to keep up with the demands? Now, I think you use Chronometer. I use Chronometer, and I like it because it allows people to see. And now it uses algorithms based on your height, weight, age, and what other metric? I think it's those. So it'll give you a general average of it with your activity and your weight and size and how much food you're eating, how many calories you probably should be eating based on those numbers. And it gives people an average. And I always like them to see, I go, look, based on these algorithms, you should technically, based on your activity day and your exercise and how much food you're eating and your weight and your height and your sex, you should be eating like 2,500 calories. And then I look over and I'm like, what did you eat? They're like, I ate 1,500 calories. I'm like, okay.
All the time. Yeah.
So do you see why your body might be struggling to keep up with these demands? Because you are under consuming what your body actually would need to keep up with the demands, right? Now, I'm not saying go ahead and eat 2,500 calories. It's saying this is what you should be having. What I'm saying is that we probably slowly need to increase that caloric intake to meet those demands, meaning your body is struggling right now. And so for your body to keep up with all your external stressors, your body's always going to prioritize your external stressors, meaning let's just say you're super fatigued, but you've got to go walk 10 miles. Well, your body will utilize all the energy it's producing to go run that 10 miles or walk that 10 miles. And so it'll shut down all your internal functions, meaning your digestion is going to go to shit. All of your other organs will kind of downregulate. It has to find the fuel or the energy somewhere. So we know that there's an adaptive response when you put too much external stressor on the system. Because your body was saying, we've got to keep up with this. We've got to keep up with her taking her children and running 50,000 errands and doing her job and doing her exercise. But to compensate because she's not consuming enough calories, we're going to make her digestive shit. Her period's going to be all shit show, right? She's not going to sleep well. She's not really going to feel good energetically. So that's all going to start down-regulating to keep up with all this external stress you're doing. And so we have to go, okay, well, how can we match these? Because we've got to be able to give your body, allow your body to have some energy to do its functions. And that's why so many people, when I go, look, when you go on vacation, you don't have all the shit going on in your life that's pulling you in 50 different directions. And I don't want you to work out. I just want you to like chill, enjoy your life, try to sleep. It's like, they're like, oh my God, I feel 100 times better, right? And I'm like, is it just the vacation? I'm like, no, it's because you've basically kept up with your energy demands. Now your demands are so much lower. Your body can kind of keep up with that. Now it has enough energy available to actually allow you to sleep better or to give you just energy that you feel better. Or maybe it gives you enough energy to actually go to the bathroom, right? Your digestive system just doesn't work in that kind of stress state. It just totally shuts down and downregulates. And so you kind of have to figure out what that energy balance is for somebody. But what's important to understand is like, how many calories do you actually need to function properly? And I think a lot of people don't understand that. And then how many, not just calories, or it's how many good calories? Because yes, eating a bunch of shit is not going to be the best approach. It's like, how many calories do you need that are full of nutrition? Because that's also part of the equation, that you can readily digest and absorb and utilize to produce the energy you need to function. And that's always the question I'm asking. And then how do we get there?
And a lot of people just don't realize the stress that they're under. Like I am a self-confessed ex-adrenaline junkie. Like
100%.
I used adrenaline to fuel me. And I come to a new place with it where I'm like, well, it actually helped me, right? Like you have to make peace with the way you used to behave. And and understand that at some point there was a purpose to it. You know, I grew up in a really traumatic environment, and my whole mantra in life was, I am going to get the fuck out of here, and I need to do really well academically to do that. And then it was, I need to start my own business, and I need to do really well at that. And so there was always this really big push of adrenaline that would force me to do everything. And probably one of the biggest undoing of my health was when I couldn't do that anymore.
Mm.
And I actually stopped, and I was like, well, who am I? Who am I without my business? Who am I? I didn't know myself anymore. It was a really scary thing. It's like, well, if I don't do that, I don't know who I am. And I think a lot of women do that with work, or because we do have this ability now to do it all. I'm going to say in air quotes again. And we want to do it all, but also it conflicts with all of the trauma from our past generations where, yes, you can do it all, but you must put yourself last. You know, and there's so much to unpack.
Yeah. And as a woman, you need to do it as a size 2 or 4. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean,
and
there's
smiling.
that component. Yeah. Smiling in high heels. And so, right. And so that doesn't work. Like, you can't do that. At least men, even if they have to do more, air quote again, whatever. They aren't being put into the calorie restricted. Like, they have more muscle mass, they have higher levels of testosterone. They don't need to be a size 2. They can, you know, and they don't diet and restrict like women, because women need to be this perfect size and weight, which gets everyone in trouble because they're trying to do that and do all the things.
Yeah.
And you just can't, you know, it just doesn't work. And so that's where you have to look at your life and go, okay, what things can we take off your plate to kind of account for allowing your body to take some of the energy it's producing instead of giving it to all your external shit? Allow it to be available to fix your system. Because if you keep taking withdrawals from the system and not put in enough deposits, you kind of become energy bankrupt, as they say, and you cannot heal in a bankruptcy state. It just doesn't work. But our society has pushed, specifically women, and still men, I see it in men as well, that they're doing this. We're not putting enough deposits in and just withdrawing. And you can do that in your 20s and even in your 30s. But try to do it in your 40s and 50s, and you are going to be slamming your head into a wall over and over again. And that's literally, my opinion, is why so many women are experiencing horrific perimenopausal in their late 30s, 40s, and into their, you know, menopausal years. Why it's so horrible, right? Because they've just been pushing themselves to this extent for way too long, and this is what the result is, you know. So probably getting on hormonal therapy for some helps fix the system. And at least, right? And the question always is with some of these therapies, because what that does do, it does allow kind of their nervous system relax a little bit. So I do think that women end up sleeping better on these kind of treatments. And better sleep, no matter how you do it, will result in better quality of life, which will result in reduction of symptoms. You know, so is it kind of that? Was it the lack of estrogen per se, or was it the fact that, you know, you're just sleeping better or whatever that's making you feel better? Because anytime you can improve someone's quality of life, however you do it, you can get a better result from it.
100%. And I also want to like have a nod to women who don't have children in this point, because sometimes I feel like with them making that choice or not making that choice in there, especially in a work environment, everyone goes to those women, oh, well, you don't have children, so here you can just take on more work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these women are in chaos and stress as well, because there's almost even more of a, well, I should be able to keep my size 4 figure because I never had the kids. And I don't know about you, Kate, but when I work with women who haven't had children because they haven't looked at their cycle, because they have never wanted to get pregnant,
Sure.
There's a whole lot of problems there as well, because how, you know, looking at how important ovulation is for cycling, women who don't want to get pregnant are quite often, and this is not their fault, don't think ovulation is important.
That could be true. Yeah. And a lot of them are already on birth control that's not allowing them to get pregnant. So there's a lot of different I mean, I know in my 20s, I didn't understand the cycle at all very well. I just know it came. Right? Other than that, it wasn't a concept we talked about or knew about. Certainly with the onset of social media and the internet, I think the younger generation is actually a lot more educated than we were. They know a lot more, but they're also inundated with so much more stress that they have to kind of learn to manage all this knowledge with kind of like, okay, look, we also need to just take things off. You can't, don't be on social media 7 hours a day. None of this is helpful to you. Right. I mean, so it's like we know more, but yet we have more shit can get us in trouble.
100%. So let's talk about some of these ailments and symptoms that people are looking to address and have been told to give up sugar and carbohydrates and why that doesn't work. On the topic of stress, adrenal fatigue or burnout, so many women are told to give up sugar and they're actually craving sugar, and they're told that's because they have adrenal fatigue, that they're craving sugar. So you must give up sugar to overcome your adrenal fatigue.
Well, adrenal fatigue is just it's a non what's diagnosis, meaning we don't really have a specific diagnostic point to say adrenal fatigue, because when we actually look at people that think they have adrenal fatigue, right? They have fatigue. Then some of them have high cortisol levels. Some of them have low cortisol levels. Some of them have normal cortisol levels. So there's no specification of what even that means. Probably they have overburdened that system. Maybe it's because they've just been going and going and going and going. First, they were probably excessively high cortisol and they're running on like stress hormones. And then basically they've hit a wall. And now they're probably super low thyroid. Their body's like specifically trying to make them tired to recover from the hell they've probably just been through. Nobody just gets adrenal fatigue like that. There usually comes before that a massive series of stress that was going on in their life prior to, getting that diagnosis. Certainly giving up your most available fuel source makes zero sense. And if we go back to understanding the stress response and the hormones that elevate and what they're trying to do, glucagon is literally considered your anti-hypoglycemic hormone because it elevates as soon as you have low blood sugar. That's the first line of this response you'll get. The first stress hormone that elevates. If that doesn't do the trick, if you don't have enough glycogen stores, then adrenaline will go off, cortisol will go off. Now, they could all kind of go off together depending on the response, but glucagon is normally your initial response, and that one will elevate like when you're sleeping initially. You're not going to get all the kind of excitatory things that might go with adrenaline when glucagon elevates, meaning it can be operating and you're not going to wake up because, it's just saying to your body, hey, release blood sugar and make sure their blood sugar is up to normal. So when we know those are trying to elevate your blood sugar, and we know that the only other thing that can work other than your stress hormones elevating your blood sugar is actually ingesting sugar to elevate your blood sugar, and we know that when we do that, we actually dampen the stress response. Well, how does it make any sense that trying to alleviate the stress response with a carbohydrate would fix something that's like keeping them super fatigued and overly stressed? Right? That's like the exact opposite of what you should be doing. You need to make it readily available, this quick energy source, so that your body can start kind of producing energy to fix the system. Now, usually what people are when they are adrenal fatigued is they've become incredibly hypothyroid, and the reduction of energy production has also occurred. Now, that might show up as, hypothyroid on a lab, or it might not. They might be totally subclinically hypothyroid. Excessive stress and cortisol can actually reduce your TSH. So if someone is really, really stressed, they will have a low TSH because it can suppress it. And it does that with meaning your body is doing this to preserve you, right? When you're highly stressed and you don't have enough fuel coming in, it's going to say, lower metabolic function down so we can preserve your tissue. So we don't keep trying to break your valuable tissue down to fuel off of to keep you going. Having a hypothyroid state is usually a result of an overstressed system. Now, not all the time. Some people actually just have poor thyroid production, but a lot of times that's what's happening. Your stress system is creating this hypothyroid state to preserve energy. And if you don't correct that and you continue to ignore it, which so many people do, because initially the stress response feels pretty darn good. High adrenaline feels pretty good, right? And you can run off that for quite some time, for decades.
Right? I reckon it was 15 years for me, but yeah.
Totally. Like you can do it and you can use it into your advantage, right? And it can be effective. But the longer you stay in it, then the system just starts to go like, we can't keep running on these stress hormones. And it just starts to then go into the fatigue state. And even Hansele like talks about that, right? You initially have that stress response and then you just go into the fatigue. I don't even remember what terminology he used, but that's essentially what's going to happen. So and just addressing your adrenals wouldn't be correcting the problem, right? Your adrenals are self-correcting, meaning if you give them enough nutrition, they can fix themselves. And so that's not necessarily, they're the result of probably an overstressed system that has been compensated and which has created probably a hypothyroid state, which might not look like a hypothyroid state if you take a lab, but I'm sure those same individuals, if you take your temperature and pulse, you're cold, you're low pulse, you're not sleeping, you feel like garbage, your digestion is shitty, probably having a crappy cycle, all of those are going to come along with it. And that's just saying your body is compensating, it's adapted to a low energy state, you're not producing energy effectively, you're not going to produce heat, and you're going to be, and usually you don't have enough fuel coming in because usually in a very stressed state, appetite goes away. So this whole system just kind of collapses, which what really people need to do is like, take 3 months off, go rest, sleep, and eat. But nobody's going to do that.
Nobody's going to do that. And why is it that we crave sugar, like when we're stressed? Or why do we crave sugar? I mean, I know why, but and you answer it in your eloquent.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great question, but we crave it because that's what we need, right? Again, especially when we're stressed, right? Remember, your nervous system can only use glucose as fuel, unless you go into starvation when it can use ketones. So it's always going to be the first line is we need sugar because that's the quickest fuel source. That's what we need, right? So when you don't eat a lot, you go on a diet, what is your brain just starts getting louder and louder, like I need carbs, you know, and then we start to think, oh my God, I have a sugar addiction. That's all I can think about. That, yeah, I want carbohydrates. I go, no, it's a protective mechanism. Your brain is literally telling you, I need fuel. Right? And if you don't give it to me, I'm going to talk to the hypothalamus pituitary, going to talk down to the adrenals, and they're going to go, hey, release those stress hormones to start breaking tissue down and to make glucose because your nervous system needs it. And your nervous system is pretty darn important. If it doesn't get fuel, you die. Right? So your brain is very, very, very important. You cut off the glucose supply, there's nothing good happens there. So that's why you're getting those cravings. And time again, when people regulate, right? And I'm not saying they just go and eat cookies and cakes and a tub of ice cream, right? You have to remember is those foods are very high in fat and calories. And those two things will create a lot of weight gain and they can still be very dysregulating. But if you eat balanced meals with easy to digest carbohydrates that stabilize your blood sugar, and now your brain's like, oh, we're getting what we need throughout the day, that feeling to constantly sugar addict or whatever is going to dissipate and get much better. But your brain telling you I need carbohydrates or sugar is a very, very normal response. And it's there to keep you alive. It's just that we've been prone to go, well, when you get to that space, you know, you're not going for a cup of orange juice, you're going for the cake or the quart of ice cream.
Yeah.
Right. And so you just ate 2,000 calories, you know, in 30 minutes. Well, yeah, but that's not going to make you feel good. And then you're going to feel guilty and bloated and, you know, and then you just gained a pound or two from just doing that. And then, you know, then the shame comes in and then you're like, okay, I'm going to give up carbs again. And you do it again for a week or two. And then, of course, as the longer you do it, the louder the voice will get again. And then something stressful happens. And then that all, you know, you're going to just choose carbohydrates and you're going to overconsume again. And it's a terrible cycle of restricting and binging. I used to do it for years. Restrict or binge, you know, and when I was dieting for photos or whatever, I would just massive willpower, and I would restrict for months and months and months and months. And then I remember once when I had a photo shoot, as soon as I was done, I came home and I think I literally ate a loaf of bread because I was so hungry by that point. As soon as I started eating all those carbohydrates, I just couldn't stop. It was just like, and I probably put on like 7 pounds in one night, just probably for water, glycogen, and so forth. But that's the result of when you do that. If you consume it regularly through the day, balancing meals, that doesn't happen. And if it is happening, then we have to ask the question is, well, are you eating enough? What is going on in your life? Are other nutrients, is there a nutrient deficiency here? Is there some digestive issues here? Like what else could be creating this problem? Because more often than not, when you do that, it corrects that problem.
I definitely feel it when I haven't had a good night's sleep.
100%.
I'm just like, oh my God, I need some carbs, man.
Yeah. Well, think about that though. When you don't sleep, right? When you sleep, it gives your nervous system a rest. And the primary fuel you use while you're in a sleep is fat. So, because your nervous system's not activated. However, if you have a rough night and you're kind of light sleeping and waking up, then your nervous system's getting activated all night long. And so it's using more carbohydrates, which could, again, then be kind of waking you up even more. So then you're going to be waking up feeling unrested and your nervous system's been activated. So yeah, then you're going to I need more carbs to kind of fix that system.
100%. And then there was a doctor who wrote a book about postnatal depletion. It's the time in your life where you just never sleep. And he said that women needed to give up carbs. I'm like, you got to be joking. Yeah. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's really hard for people to get around it. The other time I notice I really crave carbohydrates, if I've been doing a deficit, and the proper way to do a deficit is to still eat at the same time every day, but just eat less throughout the day, not just cut out a meal. But, if we do something like a deficit of 1,900 calories and then I go back to 2,300 calories, that first day of eating 2,300 calories, I am like, holy God, let me eat all of the food. So, it's that restriction. I have to be careful on that first day of going back to maintenance. No, I only eat what's in my log, or I'll eat
overconsume.
I could eat 2,600 calories if I wanted to, if I let it go on that for just on that one day.
Yeah, well, maybe you should on that one day.
Yeah, it's just having more.
Your body might be just trying to replenish the glycogen stores on some level. Maybe they haven't been fully replenished when you're in a deficit.
Yeah,
and so it's like let us fully replenish. And so it might not, even though you might gain weight on a scale, gain fat and just gain again glycogen and water stores.
No, well, actually, when I come out of that deficit, I always lose another kilo.
Do you?
Always. Yeah. After a week later, after being back at maintenance, it's called the whoosh effect. I always lose another kilo.
Yeah. And maybe it's just because I think there could be, after some level of deficit, I think it could be slight stress in the system. There might be a little inflammation. And so when you finally get all the carbs back in, the body's gives up a little bit of water. And so it's oh, you feel better.
100%. Well, yeah, I mean, going into a deficit is a stress, right? And it's, for me, my capacity is about 8 weeks and then I'm done. I just can't handle, I start losing sleep, I start getting low body temperature. And so by that point, that makes sense. I'm going to crave because, I need it. But again, it's understanding that carbs don't cause the issue. And I was just flipping through Instagram yesterday and I saw quite a prolific influencer in health in Australia. She's a whole brand and a ton of supplements and stuff that's doing a detox for skin and health. And then in her story, she promoted carbohydrates. If you have too many carbohydrates, you have too many sugars in the gut and it's bad for the gut. That was her statement.
I don't even know what that means.
People still promote this. Like if you're going to clean up, doing these cleanses where you basically eat 0 carbohydrates. And interestingly enough, I have a client and this will help us explain this, but she had candida so bad, and then she got put on a no sugar diet to fix her candida. And then that candida progressed to lichen planus. Now, doctors will say there's no link between the two of this, but they all say there's no link between anything. I've just come from that. So lichen planus is actually a disease where skin actually collapses in on itself. Like her skin's basically eating itself.
Yeah,
and
probably so the candida went deeper into her tissue.
Exactly, right? So can you please explain that to people? Because this is a myth that I'm having to bust all the time, that quitting carbohydrates actually makes your candida worse.
Yeah, well, initially it'll make it better, right? Yeah. I mean, we all have candida. It's that overgrowth that creates the problem. And the question is, like, whether candida feeds off sugar. I'm like, it does. But it usually stays in a healthy balance by doing it. Now, if you have an overgrowth, usually my experience is because some people have a really slow bowel and they just have bacteria and fungus proliferating in their system. And that's why initially kind of going on a low or no carb diet can fix it, because they're removing all the fibrous stuff from their GI. And I think that's why keto diets can be therapeutic with GI issues or autoimmune issues or anything that's kind of delegated to the immune system or the GI system, because they're just removing all the irritants from the gut. And so the gut can heal on some level. Now, the question is, for someone specific like that, it depends on if they removed whatever carbohydrates she did remove, and then she added them all back in. And if her gut isn't now have good motility, then certainly that whole fungal bacterial issue is going to come right back, because you haven't fixed the gut's motility and movement patterns. And that comes with an energized system and getting out of stress. So for that individual that has something like candida and maybe there's some overgrowth, then it would be like, well, we need to fix gut motility and we need to remove anything that's irritating and hard to digest from the system, because that's going to decrease gut motility and create more of a bacterial fest or food for bacteria or fungus that are going to kind of proliferate. So it would be removing carbohydrates specifically that might create more bacterial load. And those could be more like the grains or the starches or something that isn't fully digested in the first part of your digestive system. So sugar, like white sugar, the great thing about white sugar is it actually gets digested very quickly in your digestive system, usually within the first 10 centimeters of your small intestine. So there's really nothing left to feed the bacteria, to feed any of that fungal bacterial load that might be coming up into your small intestine, creating problems. And that energizes the system quite well. Just obviously, white sugar doesn't have a lot of nutrition. So the next best option is like, well, fruits, milk or milk sugars or honey, or anything that has, again, a low level of digestion capacity, but can be digested really early and starts fueling the system so that now you have movement within your bowels. You're not leaving anything for the bacteria, the fungus to feed off of. And ultimately, in time, that starts correcting it. Some of those people can benefit maybe by certain probiotics that can also help something like that. But I usually find if you correct their GI, get it moving, remove the foods that might be creating more of an irritation, giving them the right carbohydrates, that's usually a much better approach than just removing all of them. Because, if you don't feed candida too, it tends to just dig into the intestines or system into a deeper level and create other problems.
And can you explain how a lack of calories decreases your gut motility?
Yeah, because your gut is a big muscle and your small intestine has muscles. Your stomach has muscles in it. And for those to run, they need fuel. So for your motility to occur, you need fuel. And if you don't eat, then because your gut function isn't you don't have to have good gut function to be alive, right? We can have really shitty gut function and still be alive. It's not a high priority. It's important.
Unintended.
Right. Like if you have a decrease in calories, your body's going to prioritize those. It's going to go, well, your nervous system's really important, right? Your heart and your lungs and maybe your liver, they're going to get more of the fuel. The guts, like, and you won't, that won't be a well energized system. So the motility will become sluggish. So usually your doctor will go, well, just eat more fiber to help the motility, right? So basically we're giving you something to push things through, and that can help initially. It's like, so if you increase someone's fiber intake, initially they create more bulk, and that will help kind of push things through your system. But then for a lot of people, that creates other problems, right? Especially depending on what this fibrous stuff is, that can tend to feed the bacteria in your colon. And if you don't have quick motility, maybe you have more bulk, but it's a lot staying in your system. I mean, you might have 2 or 3 days of bulk in your intestinal system. So that tends to start feeding the bacteria more, and then you're overfeeding them, and now they're coming up into the small intestine area, and that's going to start creating more problems. And those same bacteria can create toxins or endotoxins, which have a whole nother life of their own and can do all sorts of havoc on your system. So an underfueled system will be a stress system, right? And anytime you go into a calorie deficit or underfueling your system, you will create a slight stress response because your body still has to keep up with the demands. And what we know is that your digestive system works in that parasympathetic state, rest and digest. It doesn't work in a stress state. So it literally gets shut down. So we all know that, right? When we get really stressed, some people are constipated for forever. Or if they're in a high adrenaline state, they could get diarrhea because adrenaline will kind of exacerbate and make things move through you, but not in the way we really want. Because usually when that happens and we don't have time to digest and absorb and get the nutrients out of our food. So that would be usually the result of very loose stool. But like I said, your digestive system needs fuel to run properly. And in an underfueled system, it's one of the first things it's going to suffer. Not all the time, right? I usually find that the things that suffer the most in women are usually their menstrual cycle, digestive system, sleep, all of those things kind of, everyone kind of, I always say has their Achilles heel, where their system is like the first line that gets affected. And a lot of times it's GI, a lot of times it's menstrual cycle, a lot of times it's just the sleep, or it's a combination of all of them.
Definitely. I know for Kitty it's sleep. I know for me it's GI, like my gut. But that's an interesting thing, right? Because for years I chased gut health because I had so many challenges with gut health. And I still see this with women where they're cutting out more and more foods to resolve their gut issues, where often it's just a lack of energy to get the stool moving. And especially if they're really good during the week and then on the weekend they're eating completely different foods. And I'm not saying like overindulging, but they just eat completely different food on the weekend because you're more inclined to go out, you're more inclined to, eat something different with a friend, whereas during the week you can be quite rigid and do the same thing every day. So then they think, well, I can't go out and have friends and I can't have carbs and I can't have this and I can't, because I only feel good during the week.
Yeah, I mean, and that, I think, because certainly removing foods that are irritating can be helpful, at least initially. But if you don't energize the system, that approach is only going to get you so far, right? Because what you want to do is be able to have the right foods that your body can easily absorb and digest and then convert into energy. And then so that energy is available for your digestive system and other systems of your body. And that's going to create a regular bowel movement, right? But what do most people do when they start treating their bowel? They just start restricting all these foods, or they completely remove all carbohydrates and anything that can be irritating at all. And that certainly can make their bowel feel better. And it can give it even time to heal because it's not being chronically irritated. But at the same time, it's not energizing the system because you just removed the very thing that's going to create the easier to digest energy source. So the next best thing is easy to digest carbohydrates, right? And figure out what those are to you and use those until things get better. And then as things get better, then you can add more in. To me, anytime I kind of adjust someone's diet, depending on what their symptoms are, the approach is always like, this is temporary. right? If we do this initially and then build up the system to produce energy better, eventually the goal is to be able to eat all the food you want to eat. Now, whether that actually happens or not, we don't know, because what might happen is their body just might not like certain things. Maybe it doesn't like to eat a bunch of beans, right? Doesn't mean you can't have it, but you might not get a very good response after you eat a bunch of beans. But it's not, I would never tell people you can't have it. But usually when they have an adverse reaction to it and they're like, look, I feel really good. I can eat a lot of food, but anytime I eat beans, I feel like crap. I probably just are not going to eat beans very often. Okay. And then it becomes easy to make decisions. It doesn't become a struggle, right? That we make choices based on how we feel, not because we've been told something's good or bad for us.
So how bad is white sugar for us? Because that's it's as addictive as cocaine.
Yeah.
It still makes me laugh.
Well, I think the argument is it lights up the same areas of your brain as cocaine. And I'm always like, well, so does happiness. Happiness lights up the same area as cocaine. Should we not do happiness? Right? That's just dumb. So, I mean, look, when it comes to sugar, it's always a dose makes the poison. If we look at it as an energy source, it's a great energy source. It's easy to digest. It's very accessible to us. It doesn't create any bacterial food for our microbiome. So from that level, it's a very good food. It doesn't have any nutrition in it. So from a caloric standpoint, if we need nutrition, which we do, and when we have a higher metabolic rate or are more stressed, we need more nutrition. To just eat a bunch of white sugar isn't going to be advantageous to us, because now we're going to create a bunch of nutritional deficiencies, because we should be constantly replenishing our nutrients. And so it's better to have foods that have sugar in them that also have nutrients in them. So that would be your fruits, roots, milk, honey. But white sugar isn't inherently bad. It's just shouldn't be like a massive part of your diet, because that just lacks nutrition. But it's not, like I said, it's not creating all of these problems. Nobody's getting all these diseases just by consuming copious amounts of white sugar and nothing else. It's just not happening. They're all consuming foods that contain white sugar, but they also contain all these other things, and it's just an excess of calories. Sure, if you just ate white sugar and you ate 5,000 calories of white sugar, would that be good for you? No. There's no nutrition in it, but you're probably just over-consuming calories and you'll feel a little bit dysregulated. But can, in a moderate level, be safe and good in your diet? Sure. And can you use it for certain things, specifically for people that do not digest carbohydrates very well? Can sometimes you use that as a tool to help them improve energy production while on the course of trying to improve their health? 100% you can. So, and especially if they're eating enough other foods that provide them with nutrition. But for your cells to work effectively to produce energy, they need fuel, fat or carbs. They can use both. I'm not saying fat is bad either. But in a high energy state, and while you're awake and thinking and working out, carbs will still be your preferred source. They need nutrients, a variety of different nutrients. They need oxygen. And they need thyroid hormone to kind of turn it up and turn it down. There's probably a lot of other mechanisms, but those are your main big drivers of how your body produces energy. So a lack of any of those could produce a problem.
And I think as well, it's taking it with context, right? Because I know so many people I work with, like, I saw Kitty doing this on Instagram. Kitty eats a lot of sugar. And I'm like, Kitty eats 2,800 calories a day. So by the time she's got to, 2,200, she's probably eaten all of her nutrient requirements.
Totally.
So she can have all of that sugar to make up the extra calories, right? I mean, I'm not saying that you only need to eat 2,200 calories, but if you were to look at her food diary, it would be full of nutrients, full of minerals, and then she's having the extra sugar on top, literally, to get in those calories so that she can squat 100 and whatever kilos she squat.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, you can't compare, everybody is going to be different. We have to look at your individual system and how you're actually tolerating, what your diet is, what your history is, what your stresses are right now. All of those need to come into consideration. But if you've been eating a low calorie, low nutrient diet for 5 years, well, yeah, you're going to be depleted on a lot of different levels. And that doesn't get fixed overnight. So you have to kind of go into a lot of different avenues. And for that individual that can't utilize a lot of calories yet, but maybe has decent GI function, then I wouldn't recommend any white sugar, because every calorie you have needs to be with nutrition.
Oh.
So it's about right now, we got to work on high nutrient rich foods because you've been lacking for so long. So everything that comes into you needs to have nutrition in it and calories in it. And then maybe when you get to a certain point, then you can have these other things that are just energy sources because your body is now using energy really well, or using fuel really well to produce energy.
Mm. And then you have those some clients, right, Kate? I've got a client who's been keto for so long. She went carnivore, and now she's allergic to everything. Histamines, like the whole shebang. And when we started working together, I was like, we're just going to have some sugar with your meals, some white sugar, made into like a little liquid. And she was like, are you joking? I'm like, no, I got to get you some carbs. And you're like intolerant to every single food that has carbohydrate.
That's right.
Yeah. I know Ray Pete did that, right? And used sugar in those instances.
Yeah. I've used it with people that really can't, they can't ingest a lot, right?
Mm.
I mean, and they're very, I had a client once that had to puree all his food because his body just couldn't handle digesting a lot. And we would just put spoonfuls of sugar in his pureed food to get him more calories in, because you had to build it up. And that was what he was able to tolerate. Because the problem is when somebody is really sick, their digestion doesn't usually work very well. Like people that have cancer and then their system is using energy, all their energy is being taken by this cancer source, right? It's just consuming and consuming and consuming. So for those individuals, they have to have the easiest to digest foods. That's why he would suggest things like the juice of potatoes for the protein, because it's so easy to digest. Because they need these resources. You have to meet the body where it's at. And if it can't break the foods down, doesn't matter how nutrition it is, you're not breaking it down. So you're not getting what you need from it, right? And that's why it's like, look, salad isn't necessarily bad, but in a compromised body, for you to be able to break down and extract the nutrients from all that fibrous rich food takes energy to do that. And if you don't have any, well, then you're probably not going to get what you need from that really hard to digest food. So instead of giving you a ton of salads, that you might not be being able to get what you need from it, let's have juice and other foods that aren't going to be as compromising on your system that you can extract the nutrition from. That makes more sense to me. And it doesn't mean you can't ever have a salad. And it doesn't mean they're inherently bad. And someone that has really good GI function and is able to work optimally, fine. If that's what you want to eat those things. I have no problem with that. But when you have a system that isn't operating optimally and GI issues are a big problem, which literally for me, that's what I see the most in people. It's GI issues, blood sugar issues. And I would say period issues are in there too, but those are two of the biggest issues that I see in people. And so trying to address those and fix that is important as to how someone is going to be able to convert their food into energy. Because if those systems are compromised, there's going to be problems along the way.
And it's a strategic approach, right? Like we're seeing this as well. I know Libby's been talking about this a lot. How many people are snacking 7-8 times a day, because that's a pro-metabolic approach. And as I'll say to some of my clients, well, we're snacking 8 times a day because you used to eat 1 meal a day. So, and then we got to slowly build that up to 3 meals, right? Or 4 meals, or whatever your body likes, or 2 meals or 2 snacks. We can't, when Kate and I are talking about giving these clients sugar, we're not saying, oh, you're going to puree your food forever and have sugar in your food forever. It's a starting point. And the goal is to get you eating 3 square meals a day with snacks or whatever it is that you like. I personally do better on 4 meals per day.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a meal, I mean, like 500, 600 calories. It's not.
Yeah. And I think when your system is working better, you store glycogen better, you can probably have bigger meals and that feels better. But someone who has a really compromised digestive system, huge meals usually don't do well for them. It's better to give them little small meals because their system doesn't have to be working all day long, so, or it doesn't have to, because it's just too much calories for them at once. So it's better for them just to have these smaller meals that seem to regulate them better. But again, you sometimes don't know until you try. Some people, even with digestive issues, feel better with a little bit bigger meal, and so they don't have to eat as often. It kind of can depend. But the strategy is always to figure out where you're at right now, what your individual body is doing and how it responds appropriately, and trying those things, and then kind of guiding it to a process where it can get better and heal and feel better about it, so that you can eat a more variety diet and that you don't have histamine responses, or that you don't have all these allergic reactions to everything, right? We're trying to get you away from that. But the whole concept is to increase energy production. That's the bottom line.
Let's talk about CGM, constant glucose monitors, because this has become a really popular trend. I go out now and I see people just with them stuck on them, and it's all over TikTok and Instagram. And I want to be clear and say I have had a client use it, and we've used it in our work together, and it is appropriate. Everything can be appropriate, I think, when it's used in the right way. But
absolutely,
there's some stuff going on with these constant glucose monitors that's actually making people, I think, worse and more stressed. Can you talk about the relevance of them and how they work and how we should be using them?
Well, CGMs, constant glucose monitors, are just basically measuring your blood glucose all day long. And I think they're giving you like a feedback every 5 minutes and telling you what your glucose numbers are. So they're a great place to collect data. I think they can make people neurotic. I think if you are diabetic or even pre-diabetic, it's good information for you. But at the same time, we have to remember, it's not just food that can create poor blood sugar numbers. Food is the thing that you put in, but it's not the reason why you might have poor blood sugar numbers. And so we have to create a bigger picture of why you might be getting these poor responses. Because if you're just saying, well, I need to change on my food, like I eat, a balanced meal that has carbohydrates, fat, and protein in, but my blood glucose is spiking when I eat that meal, right? So most people are going to look at that and go, well, I just need to eat less carbs. And then, yes, if you eat less carbs, it will be less. You won't get as big a spike, right? Because you've taken all the carbohydrates. However, you should be able to eat carbs, fat, and protein together and not get these massive spikes. And again, what I mean by massive spike is here in the United States, level blood glucose could be 100. You can go up to 140, and that could be considered quite normal. Now it's being promoted like, well, you don't want to be more than 20 or 30 points above your norm, and that would be too much. And so, but there's no science or data that says that is bad. So what people end up doing is they just eat these very low carbohydrate diets based on what their blood glucose, if their CGM is telling them. And that, again, as we've been talking about, might not be the best approach for them, specifically if they're having a lot of stress and so forth. Because when you are stressed, you aren't going to respond as well to carbohydrates. You need them. But if your body's running on stress hormones, just like I said, the initial response is normally those blood glucose numbers might be a little bit higher until you can kind of meet the demands. Because again, right, because those hormones are elevating and they're trying to elevate your blood glucose numbers. How many people have woken up that have kind of poor glucose tolerance with elevated blood glucose? That elevated blood glucose is not because of the carbohydrate you ate 8 hours ago. That's gone. That's out of your system. That is coming because you're waking up with a stress response and your body's responding by raising your blood glucose by itself. And it's overshooting because your body can't tolerate the carbohydrate or the glucose numbers. Because again, you're also dumping fat into the blood at that same time. And so your body might having a poor response. So with that said, if you don't know all of these things and are just walking around with a CGM and making low carbohydrate dietary decisions, again, as we've discussed, that's not necessarily the best decision. At the same time, you're getting this feedback every 5 minutes. It's kind of like getting on a scale every 5 minutes all day long. That's going to be really triggering to you. You're going to be kind of, why is my blood glucose? Oh, I just ate a blueberry. My blood glucose went up. Oh, I can't have a blueberry now. right? You're going to start getting all crazy in your head and think you can't have any of this food. And it's going to make someone totally neurotic. Just like I said, if you have these people that get on a scale like 10 times a day, that is not a way to live, because your weight fluctuates as the day goes. You can gain and lose 4 or 5 pounds in one day. That's totally normal. Just like your blood glucose is going to go up as you eat and back down. That's totally normal. And if you're just going to respond to that all day long and try to not eat these foods, you're going to get yourself in trouble, creating more stress in your system and having even an adverse reaction when you do eat the carbohydrates.
That's what I'm saying. This is sending people crazy.
Totally. I mean, like I said, I know that people are sensitive. Sometimes it is helpful to them, especially if we balance a meal. Say, hey, look, when you balance this meal and you sat and you had time to eat, look at the response you got, versus when you even had that same meal and you tried to eat it in 5 minutes and run out the door. Look what happened. Here's the difference, right? Or look, when you made a smoothie and you drank it in 5 minutes, right? Maybe, or versus you made a smoothie and you took 20 minutes to consume it. Look at the different response, that you got from your blood sugar. Those are sometimes good bits of information, because then it tells people to slow down. Then they eat, sometimes it's not the food, maybe it's just how fast you're eating the food. Sometimes I go, well, what was happening before this? They're like, oh, I was totally stressed out. I had this conversation. Like, okay. So, sometimes it's good to see that it's more than just the food that's creating these responses. And I think if somebody is wearing one and working with a practitioner that can give them feedback and understanding of what this information means, I think that can be super helpful. But just to be walking around with it all day long with nobody to have that conversation with you and think I should eliminate carbohydrates and have it flatline blood sugar is not a good approach. And it's going to make you crazy.
But I found it helpful with a couple of clients who've come from that low carb diet and then are freaked out when they eat carbs. They have high blood sugar, and I use it to help them go, well, we're going to start with 20 grams of carbohydrates per meal, or 10 grams, and see how that goes. Then we're going to push it up. Like, what is the point that you can handle right now? But I'm always doing that in conjunction with temperature and pulse. Can you talk about how temperature and pulse gives us a more helpful understanding of blood sugar and energy?
Definitely for energy production. And again, temperature and pulse are not a perfect metric either, but they are easy, and you don't have to have something pinned into your skin, and they're basically free. But when you produce energy, when you convert food into energy, one of the waste things is heat. So if you produce a lot of energy, you have more heat production, which means your body temperature will increase. If your body's gone through some sort of adaptive mechanism and it's low energy production, then you'll have a lower body temperature. So we can use that as a metric to say, hey, is your body converting your food into energy better? Are you producing more heat? And so taking your morning temperature and then 20, 30 minutes after your food will let you know, are you converting your food into energy appropriately? And so that's where the temperature comes in. Same thing with pulse. It's going to also elevate when your energy production is working optimally. A lot of people that have a very, very low pulse, specifically usually athletes or even seniors seem to have a low pulse. They become slightly adaptive to low energy production. And that doesn't seem to make sense to a lot of people. But look, if you are exercising a lot, it makes sense to make your body more efficient during that activity, so that your body just doesn't catabolize its own muscle to run on, because you're going into such activity for so long periods of time. And so you usually will see athletes have a lower pulse, and that is an adaptive mechanism. Now, I've always found, we've always suggested that optimal pulse should be around 75 or 90 beats per minute, because that means that your body's like kind of running at a place that it's optimized metabolically. But athletes, in my opinion, will always be slightly lower. And I've always seen that anytime I've kind of gotten my pulse up, then I've decided to do some sort of event and trained 3 or 4 months for it, my pulse will always drop back down. And it does it on an adaptive level, because you're going to be working very hard, burning a lot of calories. Your body's going to be like, look, we can't keep up with this, so we're just going to kind of lower everything down a little bit while you're doing this. Me personally, when I've done kind of longer distance activities after I've tried to go through healing, I usually am the one person, even though I might be the smallest, who usually eats the most calories during the event, because I'm trying not to have that adaptive mechanism occur on me. So I'm constantly eating, but it's super inefficient, you know, to constantly sit there and try to eat while you're doing a cycling event or whatnot. So, you know, most people can just, they don't do that. They don't eat as much. But metabolically, they're going to create an adaptive response from that.
Mm. So it's always alarming when you see someone who doesn't exercise a huge amount and they've got a pulse of 50.
Yeah. Yeah. You see that a lot in senior. I mean,
oh yeah, and a lot of senior people, yeah. Or people who just do like 3 gym classes a week, 3 HIIT classes a week, and they've got a pulse of 50. Like that's...
Yeah. And just to be clear, because, and this is where we get into trouble, if you have a high pulse based on stress hormones, because you can also have a high pulse from stress hormones, and you can even have a high body temperature from stress hormones. Because if your body's breaking down tissue, it still can be creating a lot of heat. So that is one side of things. Mm-hmm. And that's not ideal. And so that's why we also can't just look at temperature and pulse in isolation. We have to look at all the other symptoms that are going along with it. And that's why we also, if you are actually having a high temperature and pulse based on high adrenaline, which happens, people wake up very warm and they have a high pulse, you will know that's happening because when they eat, instead of it increasing, it will decrease. Mm. So for those people, once they eat food, their temperature and pulse will drop, not increase. And that's when you know that you are waking up in a slight stress response. And those are the same people, if you see their temperature and pulse just kind of go up and down all day long, then they're probably in some sort of stress response, right? Because you should wake up around 97.8. It should elevate to 98.6 during the midday and stay up and then start going down a little bit come nighttime. Okay. So it should be something like a bell curve. It shouldn't be zigzagging all over the place all day long. Mm. And so that means there's some level of dysregulation occurring, and we want it to kind of be more equalized.
Mm-hmm. That's 36.6 for all the...
Oh, yeah. You guys, that's right. You guys get up to 37. And yeah. Is it 36? What is it upon weight?
Well, I sort of say 36.6 and 37. So it's like 0.2 of a degree difference. And then with your cycle, it's going to drop as well. But I was always one of those people that had a really high heart rate, 110, 120, just sitting there.
Wow. Yeah, so you were a nice high adrenaline space.
High adrenaline. And you know what? I actually was teaching a spin class, and this is how I got diagnosed with thyroid issues. I was teaching a spin class and my heart rate went over 200, and it stayed there for 4 hours after I got off the bike.
Wow. Yeah, that's not good.
No, but it is a real, it's an interesting one with clients as well, because you find when people stop exercising, they get cold. Mm. Mm-hmm. And so they'll say to you, but if I don't train, I feel sick or I feel tired or
Exactly.
Or if I don't train, I used to be the person that if I hadn't run, I would have to go for a run before I went to bed. So I'd be able to get tired enough to sleep. Mm. So yeah, when I said I was an adrenaline junkie, I'm some adrenaline junkie.
You had to like kind of work it out of you on some level. Yeah, like, and I mean, I think I probably, no, usually, I definitely had that. I felt like I was dead a lot of times. Like, you know, I would be exhausted and I would make myself go and do a class or, you know, get my adrenaline back up when I feel energized, right? And that's why I always thought, oh, no, exercise gives me energy. You know, and I'm like, no, exercise increases my adrenaline. And that's why I felt more energized. But it wasn't because it was a good thing. It was, I was pushing the system even harder. And so I know when I found this approach, I pulled back on all of my exercise and I realized how tired I was. And I just slept so much more. I tried to just kind of take things off of my plate and try to let my system to actually fix itself. And that was the hardest part for me, was kind of decreasing the exercise load, because I just couldn't wrap my brain around that. It took me a while to kind of get that, you know, and I really understood it once I actually tore my meniscus and I couldn't do anything. And it was very interesting because I think my body just all of a sudden liked it, right? I was like, oh, thank God you're finally not pushing us to the umpteenth degree. And I think I lost within 2 months, I just dropped 10 pounds like that. And my body was like, we're so grateful that you're not trying to just crush us all the time. And that's when my whole training changed. I'm like, I am not doing this 6 days a week, hours every day, 3 days a week, 3 hours. I'm good.
Yeah, it's enough, right?
That's what worked. Yep. For
Training smarter, not harder.
That's right.
Oh, I had one more question for you.
Yeah.
I know I've forgotten
what it
was. Oh my God. Why have I forgotten what it was? Oh, that's right. Fructose and glucose. I am really finding, especially with myself and with clients, that sometimes it's about getting the balance of the fruit and the starch. Because people generally think of carbs as starch always. And
I think a fruit is a starch?
No, that carbs are starches.
Oh, yes, exactly.
So, and a lot of people have messaged me on Instagram, which is so great as well, saying, oh, I noticed you always have fruit with a meal. And I've started doing that too. And I feel so much better. Now, it's really part of my culture, right? I'm Asian. We always have fruit, some kind of fruit with a meal. So it wasn't weird to me. Even with breakfast, you would have some kind of mango chutney or, something. So to me, fruit is like, I have to have fruit with every single snack or meal. It's just my thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people are trying it for the first time. They're like, why do I feel so good having a piece of fruit?
Yeah.
With a meal.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, and half the reason is fruit is that easy to digest, quick energy source. And fructose doesn't really seem to impact your blood sugar very much, right? That's the other thing I always find funny because a lot of these, low carb people are like, fructose is the enemy. And I'm like, fructose doesn't even impact your blood sugar, right? And then you hear, well, fructose is just going to turn to fat in your liver. And I'm like, but it doesn't do that. It really just turns into glucose. I mean, there is a small percent that might. And if you're probably in nutrient deficiency, specifically in choline, you might increase more fat in the liver, but that's certainly not the mechanism of really what's happening. There's usually a lot of other things that are occurring. But for the most part, I think having that quick energy source with a complex carbohydrate, so it's almost like your body gets the carbs to kind of help regulate you to make you feel better initially. And then you have the slower digestible carbs that come in afterwards that keep you steady for a longer period of time. So I do think that combination can be very effective for a lot of people because the starch is going to just take longer, right? And if you also have a lot of GI issues, sometimes the starch, you do produce that amylase enzyme. I think your stomach and your small intestine produce it and in your mouth, but you can have larger particles kind of go back into the colon area. So it can be a little bit more disruptive to some people. And that's why Ray has always said it can be more fattening, because it can tend to feed more bacteria at the end. And if that occurs, and then you produce more endotoxin, and the toxins can inhibit cellular respiration, and that can contribute to poor glucose management. That's why that's happening. So just having that combination of a quick breakdown fruit, probably with minerals too. And maybe it's, they just needed more carbohydrates. Maybe that was part of the answer, but they got the quick energy source initially that pulls their blood sugar up quickly. Now they have the slow release coming in, and that tends to keep them more regulated. For some people that are like, that say I have like a meat and potato meal and I feel like almost hungry immediately afterwards. And then my only thought is that really shouldn't happen. But what might be happening is it's taking too long for their blood sugar to pull up to where they feel good. So the answer to those people is like, well, consume some fruit or some juice either during or before that heavy meal and see if that makes you feel better longer. Because usually it's like your body just needed a little bit more time to feel regulated. And so to get your blood sugar back up, and that way the juice should do that. And then the other carbs come back in and keep you regulated for much longer.
Yeah, I find fructose is cleansing to the liver, right? I think Jay Feldman was talking about a study they did on it actually detoxifies alcohol from the liver.
Fructose helps you detox alcohol like 80% faster. So that's why it's recommended if you consume alcohol to have like fruit juice with it. It actually helps you detox alcohol. So it actually can be therapeutic for the liver. But it does metabolize differently, and it can convert to triglycerides in a system that probably has other issues in it. So I think it's more complex. It's certainly fructose, you hear some of these anti-sugar people, there's fructose just turns into fat in your liver and you're going to get fatty liver by eating fruit. And then there's no study that says that.
No, it was just
simply, people that eat when they've studied people that eat high fruit diets, that's actually the opposite. None of those things are true. So they're just looking at a mechanism of when people probably are consuming high amounts of soda that has a lot of fructose in it, and it's in a calorie excess. So when you eat too many calories and your body's using, and they have a ton of fructose in there, then that probably can happen. The excess calories in the fructose could turn into fat. But there's other variables that have to be going on at the same time. So if you consume like 6 liters of soda, yeah, you might somehow get fatty liver over time with that approach. But it's low density, low nutrient density, high calorie, and it's an excess. And nobody's eating 6 liters of soda. Well, maybe somebody is, and they probably have fatty liver.
So where does juice fit in? Because juice is so touted still in the health industry. And I noticed the Glucose Goddess touts juice a lot. But orange juice is so helpful and beneficial in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, it's an easy to digest carbohydrate. It has tons of potassium in it, has vitamin C in it, it's high in nutrients. Again, in the wrong body, if you do not tolerate glucose very well and just drink a ton of juice, you probably with a glucose monitor don't have a great response. Does that mean juice is inherently bad? No, it just means in your body right now, you don't respond appropriately to it. So it could be decrease the dose. It could be that, well, you just need to eat it with some more solid foods. It could mean that you should sip on it versus chug it. There's a lot of ways that you can take in that juice and not have a negative response to it. For some people, look, the speed of how you eat plays a role on your blood sugar. And if you're eating, and if you're consuming liquids are going to get in quicker than anything else because they're no fiber, and especially if they don't have proteins or fats in them, they're just going right in. There's very little to digest. They're going to go right into your system. And if I drank 10 ounces of juice and just guzzled it down in a minute, that's going to get in there super quickly. So yeah, if I had a glucose monitor, would it spike up more than other foods? Yeah, it would, because of how you're consuming it and the fact that it's liquid. Does it mean it's inherently bad? No. It could be, and again, if someone has good glucose control, they're not going to get these weird high spikes. But if somebody has poor glucose control, they will, right? And what I see on Instagram is people that eat low carb diets, and then they check their glucose response with carbohydrate rich foods and go, oh my God, look at how I responded to this food. This is poison. It's creating this horrible glucose response on me. And my answer is, well, yeah, because you're low carb, because you've created this level of insulin resistance and you have poor insulin sensitivity because you don't eat carbs. So that when you do eat carbs, your insulin response is going to be much slower than the normal person. So you're going to get higher blood sugar numbers. So really, you're telling me is your body sucks at having carbohydrates, not the normal body would be, right? But it looks good. It fears everybody of having carbohydrates because they do these stupid tests. But a normal glucose response wouldn't do that in a normal individual. And having juice doesn't do that. Again, it always comes back to you as the individual. But because juice is a good food, and if you aren't having a great response by drinking it quickly, then okay, well, slow down how fast you drink it. That you'll get a slower glucose response. Don't guzzle it. Consume it with other foods. Have it with some eggs and sourdough or cottage cheese. Have it as a meal so that, again, you won't get this exacerbated glucose response. Sometimes I help people, well, just dilute it. Dilute it with water or carbonated water and sip on it. And again, you can still get it in. It helps you sip it slower. You'll still be able to get these nutrients in without having that kind of response. There are some things that you can do so people that don't have great responses don't have a horrible response while you're still working on why they're having a horrible response to improve that over time.
And I think with in the pro-metabolic space as well, people have heard, oh, juice is good, so I can have as much juice as I want.
Right.
And that's simply because they're not willing to take the time to prepare their other carbohydrates. And they go, oh, I don't have carbs, so I'll have some juice because that's on the list and that's okay. And then they get into a habit of having juice with every meal.
Yeah. And for some people, and this is why you get wonky, like this crazy, like I had a horrible response doing this kind of diet, and some people have a great response. And because it's very individualized and your health matters on how well you're going to respond to this, which most other dietary approaches, because they're usually restricting you on some level, and because you're just going into a calorie deficit immediately, and like you can follow their approach and you're going to go into a calorie deficit. So on some level, you might get a decent response just because you're eating less, right? Where that's not this approach. It's not, the goal here is not just to help you lose weight. The goal is to help you kind of regulate and produce energy better. And it's not a clear cut, like, how does that even happen? You can use these foods in the context that they should be used. But for some people, they don't work that way. And all it is giving you information, right? If these foods are good for you and all of a sudden you're eating them and you gain a ton of weight, well, okay, so then you need to log and go, all right, well, I'm eating 500 more calories than I was eating. Okay, well, that's information. Reduce your calories to meet yourself where you were. And now use some of the foods that are recommended in the appropriate meals, like balance them appropriately, and then see what kind of response you get there. Great. Now let's go from there. Now let's increase your calories. Now let's, right? Whatever we have to do from that. But you have to start where your body's at, right? And it's kind of figuring out, where is your body at right now? Where do we need to start? Where do we need to go from here? Versus people come into it, read it, and they just go from A to Z, because people are so, I think, in tune of like, well, I'm just going to eat these foods and that's going to give me the result. And it's not that clear, which does make it a little bit more work.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, knowledge is power. And the more you understand and learn, then you can learn, because look, your body's never going to be the same. You're always going to have different stressors in your life. And if you can learn how to mitigate those, and you can learn when you need to change your diet at appropriate times to meet your demands, that's the power. Because then you don't have to follow any dietary approach. Now you just understand your physiology better. And now you know how to change it based on what's going on in your life.
And sometimes it is like, it's accountability and agency, right? Like, I came to you last year for some help, and people would go, oh, you're a coach, you get coaching? I was like, yeah, because sometimes I just get stuck in my own belief system or my own mindset, and just having that person to look at over your log and go, like, I think, remember I was saying, oh yeah, you were like, how's your poop? And I'm like, oh yeah, I poop like 4 times a day. And you were like, that's a lot of poop. I'm like, yeah, yes, it is. But, I was just thinking, well, it's better than not pooping. And I just, and
Sure.
And you were like, when your gut's irritated, I'm like, maybe it is. And sometimes it's just like getting, you just go right with your life, and you don't think, and it's really valuable to have that other person.
100%. Sometimes we can't see our own shit, like, why do we have people edit our work, right? I read my stuff all the time and I'm like, it's fine. And then I'm like, someone will look at it and go, okay. And I'm like, I can't see it. We can't see our own shit sometimes. It's just how it is. And that's why you do have other people. And I certainly do. I'm like, and maybe you even know the answer, but you need to work it through with somebody else having the conversation to go, no, look, it's that thing you've been thinking about. That's the potential, right? And you have to have that conversation, and so that you can go, okay, now I have more clarity. I was kind of guessing it. I kind of thought it was, and maybe it is, but sometimes you need that person to just go, look, here it is. This is what you need to do. This is what we need to do. Let's do this now. We're going to do it for 2 or 3 more weeks, and we'll reassess. Let's just control that variable right now. And then they're like, oh, that was something. So now right? And it's good to have those conversations with somebody, because then they can kind of verify with you that this is, yes, you're on the right track, or yes, this is normal for you to have this experience. That's totally, what's going to happen. This is what we can try next. So that's just, it's just nice to have someone to kind of go along that path with you to kind of give you that feedback 100%.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, because we didn't really touch on this, and this is the big thing that people are afraid of, is that if I have carbohydrates, my insulin is too high and it affects my insulin. Can we just explain to people a little bit how not having carbohydrates affects our insulin receptor and how that works?
Yeah, well, that's like kind of what I was saying. That's why people that go low carb or keto become literally insulin resistant, meaning once they finally do have carbs, their response is horrible, right? The response of their insulin is much slower. And so they usually will have higher than normal blood sugar numbers. So I've worked with people that are strictly zero carb carnivores, and usually it'll feel good until they don't. And then once they reintroduce carbohydrates into their diet, their blood sugars are like pre-diabetic or diabetic range. And they don't really have any other symptoms of it other than once they eat carbs, they have a horrible response to them. So lack of carbohydrates will produce insulin resistance along with other things. But every time you have carbs, yeah, insulin elevates. That's what it's supposed to do, right? So normally it's like your insulinic response is there is an elevation to that, and then it should come right back down. And then, so there is almost a spike of insulin that occurs, and then that insulin should help the carbohydrates get to where they need to go. And when you become less insulin sensitive, the carbohydrates elevate, and you actually don't get that kind of a spike as much, or you can get an elevation, but what ends up happening is the insulin stays elevated and it keeps staying elevated. So you'll have these like elevated insulin numbers post your eating that should have gone back down. So like if you went and got your fasting blood glucose taken, and they took a fasting insulin, right? Someone that might have had a poor insulin response has elevated insulin even when there's no food coming in, because they're just dampened and it stays elevated. Because like I said, it should come back down to a normal level. But you need insulin, right? You need insulin to build muscle. You need insulin to utilize protein properly. You need insulin. It's not a bad hormone. It's a good hormone. It's an anabolic hormone. But under stress and with poor glucose tolerance, it kind of gets wonky to the point where in the diabetic state, you just stop responding at all. And your insulin just keeps raising and raising and raising to some point, maybe your body just stops producing it because you're not responding. And then blood sugar levels stay elevated. And that would be when someone would need to get on insulin in a diabetic state. But is the insulin the problem? Is that causing the problem? And normally it's not. It's just a symptom of the problem of the carbohydrate unable to either get into the cell, or it's in the cell and it can't move through the system because it's blocked up by nutrient deficiencies, by endotoxins, by polyunsaturated fats, by numerous things that are inhibiting your body from using it appropriately.
And that is one of the problems of a standard American diet, right? It's not just the sugar, it's the excessive amount. When they talk about the standard American diet causes diabetes, it's also the high amount of polyunsaturated fats and endotoxin in that diet, not just the sugar.
Yeah, it's just a shitty processed food diet. And I mean, and it's too many calories of crappy food, processed food, high amount of the polyunsaturated oils, just highly additives, just probably just an excessive shit. And then they put, and they'll put things in there that make it taste better. And so you just eat too much. And it's, we have done controlled trials with like processed food diets to like whole food diets. And they did one for, I think it was 30 days. And they actually created it. I can't remember, was it Kevin Hall that did it? But he created equal diets with same amount of protein, carbs, minerals, nutrients. The only difference was one was highly processed and one was not, was like more real food. And they just said, eat as much as you want to whenever you're full. And then they calculated how many calories those people ate per day. And then they switched them, right? So to make sure that it wasn't the people, then they switched the diets and the people, and then they found that, that people were eating the shitty food, then came over and ate the good food. And what they found is that the people eating the processed food just ate about 500 calories extra every day, with all other variables the same. So the people that had the high calorie diets would gain weight, and then when they go to the other diet, they would lose weight, and vice versa. So, and they usually found that the two things that were contributing to the excess were, sodium and fat, because those two things do make food taste a lot better. And they were just eating in this excess. So that's our diet. It's very highly processed, right? And so when you eat a very highly processed diet, you just eat excess calories, and then excess calories in the form of, like, you have a lot of oils that aren't very good for you and processed food. They're going to become endocrine disruptors. They're going to mess with your digestive system. You're going to produce more bacterial, and that bacteria produce more endotoxin. That's going to leak into your blood system. That's going to inhibit cellular respiration. That's going to give you fatty liver. It's going to create poor blood sugar. It just plays complete havoc on your system. So that's why some people might look, if you can just eat better food, stop eating all this processed fast food, eat better food. That can sometimes just fix people, but that's where we're at. We didn't used to have all these problems when we didn't have such shitty food.
The last thing I want to touch on too is that carbohydrates. I'm looking at a lot of these studies at the moment while I'm writing my course. Carbohydrate is so important for thyroid hormone. And I'm actually looking at a few studies on epileptic children, and they restricted carbohydrates. So you put them on a keto diet to control their seizures. And pretty much every child, I love the way they write these tests too. Like, we see no problem with them being on low carb diets long term. They just need to be on thyroxine. So we have to sustain this diet.
Yeah. Well, and that wouldn't even work, because
That wouldn't even work either.
Yeah, because
but it actually took me a while to find the study that actually had tested T3 for starters. The other studies, so when we're talking about testing a thyroid panel, they were saying that we know that we need glucose to convert thyroid hormone in the liver. So all of the children in these studies had presented with hypothyroidism as a result of a ketogenic diet. But only one of them actually tested T3. The rest of them only tested TSH, and some had tested T4. Can we just talk about how carbohydrates are really important for thyroid function? Because when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, I was told to quit carbs. And it made it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually it's like quit gluten, dairy, reduce carbs. Those are some common recommendations. And if we can understand that a lot of autoimmune issues come from GI dysfunction, and removing irritating foods can sometimes be beneficial to people that have any sort of autoimmune issue like Hashimoto's or arthritis or anything. They can definitely see improvements. But from a concept of like hypothyroidism and stress, when we are, like we've talked about, when you are in a high stress state, your body will literally produce hypothyroidism. It lowers thyroid function. That's just how it works. High stress, low thyroid. Good thyroid function, stress is being mitigated. So they're kind of antagonistic to each other. And so high stress, low thyroid. What is the thing that helps mitigate the stress response? Carbohydrates. So it would always make sense. We want to mitigate the stress response because that's going to help thyroid function. So that would be carbohydrates. So eliminating them is going to have the opposite effect over the long haul. The other thing is that, as you stated, that your T4 is inactive. And for it to become active, it needs to convert into T3, active thyroid hormone. And it needs carbohydrates to do that. So that's why people that go on low carbohydrate diet sometimes become hypothyroid, and they have lower levels of thyroid hormone because they don't have the glucose to convert their inactive thyroid into active thyroid. So there's a lot of different mechanisms that are probably occurring that aren't going to be helpful to reduce carbs in that state. But lots of context needs to be given. Like I said, if you have an autoimmune issue, sometimes removing gut irritants can be helpful, and helping to heal the gut can be helpful. And if somebody is assuming carbs are like bunts of bread and pasta, right, then yeah, probably reducing those initially and having other better, easy to digest carbs would be a better approach. But reducing gut irritants is certainly usually going to help with most autoimmune issues. And at the same time, if you have some level of hypothyroidism, even if it's Hashimoto's, we definitely want to support the body's energy production and get it out of any sort of stress response. And the best way to do that is to consume, digest, and absorb carbohydrates.
100%.
Yeah.
And especially for kids too, right? Carbs are so important for children. Like I really notice that with my daughter's friends, a lot of their parents are afraid of giving their kids carbohydrates. And I reckon my daughter eats 2,000 calories some days.
Yeah. Yeah.
It ebbs and flows, right? It ebbs and flows. But she eats a ton of carbs, man. I could not imagine not giving her a carbohydrate. Like the amount of energy that she is burning through
Totally
on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And they probably need more carbs than adults, right?
I don't know where the point is. I mean, they definitely use more per pound. Obviously they're smaller than us, but they're growing. So the number, I actually think babies, when they looked at how many calories they use per pound, are the highest metabolic rate, because they're like 9 pounds, right?
Yeah.
So they use a high, and then as kids start to grow, it goes down a little bit, but they're still using more energy per pound than we are until they hit their, growth and the growth, because that's a very metabolic process. And they're turning things over very quickly, right? They can use an abundance of fuel because they're turning over tissues. That's why they heal really fast. That's why they can just sleep really deeply if they're getting enough fuel. But I think parents are afraid, I'm going to give my kid sugar and he's going to become hyperactive. And I go, look, it's just an energy source.
Yeah.
It is giving them energy. Of course, if you give them a bunch of sugar and fat and in cups and you don't have enough protein with it, that you might dysregulate their blood sugar a little bit. So it could kind of crank up their blood sugar level, and then it might drop because they're running around and all of a sudden their blood sugar drops and now they become, cranky and agitated. You're going to blame it on the sugar, but it might just be the response and because it wasn't properly balanced. But look, sugar is just fuel for them. They burn through it quickly because they're using it for turnover. But kids need nutrients too. So it's always best, again, to give them food with nutrition and still with ample amount of protein, because they need a considerable amount because they're growing. And that's what our tissue is made out of. You need all that protein for growth. So that's why a lot of children don't do really well on vegan diets. There's just not enough protein and bioavailable nutrients for them. It can happen, but usually you start to see issues with them.
And the reason why they have that response to a birthday party is because it's just all sugar. It's not in balance.
Yeah, and they're excited, and you're just giving them fuel. You just gave them a bunch of fuel, and they're excited, and they're running around, right? And they're burning through it. But what it could be happening too is then, because you haven't given them any substance, then their blood sugar just kind of drops, and then that's when they get cranky and agitated, right? And then you're like, their sugar is creating that problem. I'm like, look, well, let's just not blame it on them. It does give them energy, but they use that, and then their blood sugar probably drops because you didn't give them sustenance, and that's why they're going to get cranky. But if you just if they get a meal and then a cupcake, that usually is not going to happen. They'll usually just respond appropriately.
I noticed with Shanti, we always feed her a proper meal before she goes to a birthday party.
Yeah.
She doesn't actually eat that much crap then because she's satiated, right? She'll just have a few things. She generally brings a ton of lollies home.
Yeah.
But also, I think an important thing to say with children is we need to be careful not to teach them that food is bad as well, because that's what starts the binging and the, and I even say this to my clients, and I've been doing it with myself, the things that I am not supposed to do, right? I'm not supposed to be on Instagram all day. It's a total waste of time. but it's addictive. But when I allow myself, well, on Sunday morning, I'm going to sit on Instagram for an hour and I'm going to go into a scroll hole. I'm going to fully allow myself to do that.
Uh-huh.
I get my feed and I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm done. And now I'm
Totally.
not thinking about it all day and going back to it, you know. So if we say to our kids, well, yeah, you had a great meal and it's Saturday and it's, you know, we're going to a party, have some cake.
Totally. 100%. Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever talked to your adult friends who grew up with their parents restricting them and there was never sugar allowed in the house. And they, you know, their parents had a weird diet. All of my friends that grew up that way all have food issues today.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they all have them and they've had them all their life. And I'm like, you know, we do learn. You don't know these things as you're growing up, but look, kids need good fuel. If the majority of the calories you're giving them are sustainable, you know, some good protein, good carbohydrates, fruit, and regular food, then they can have cakes and cookies, you know, and be totally fine and should be allowed to go to parties and have these things. And a lot of times when they actually are regulated, they know how that feels to be regulated. And so when they go and they eat too much of these, they're like, I don't really like that. You know, it doesn't make me feel good. And so then we learn to make decisions based on, I just don't eat that because it doesn't make me feel good versus I can't have that because I've been told it's a bad food. That doesn't work very well.
No.
And as soon as you tell that to a kid, they want it more than ever. And then they have food issues with all the bad and the good food. And, you know, and then they label themselves good or bad based on if they had the bad food. I know I certainly did that because I put everything in a category and then you start to identify as your behaviors. And that's not good. It's better to say, what makes me feel good? How do I feel when I'm eating this way? And then choose based on that. And then the decisions become way easier and it doesn't overtake your life. And you can just eat because you know that food makes me feel good. And I want to eat that because it makes me feel good. And if I'm hungry, I can still eat this less than ideal food because I'm hungry. But, you know, it's not something I'm going to choose all the time because I've now eaten it and I'm not going to become addicted to whatever. It's just that that's available. I'm going to eat it for the time being, but I'd rather choose the other foods that make me feel better.
100%. And there's something nice. That's what I'm saying to people. You're meant to get to that point where you're like, I'm going to go and have pizza with my friends and it's going to be great.
Yeah.
I remember when it was like, oh my God, okay, well, they're going to go for pizza. Well, I could get a gluten-free one. But what is their gluten-free base actually made of? Am I going to be like really bloated afterwards? And
it's stressful. Yeah. And it's not very fun.
It's not.
It's not. And you miss out on a lot, you know. You miss out on some wonderful food sometimes because you're like, I can't have that. It's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to, you know, whatever. And again, I'm not saying that you should just go out and eat like that all the time. And certainly when you're healing, that you might have to eat less foods until you get to a better place where you can eat more. There's always stages, but you go through the stages appropriately. You know, again, the always goal is so that you can have more flexibility at the end. That's what we want. We don't want you to be more restricted and be eating 1,200 calories. We want you to be able to eat more and feel good and sleep and have a regular cycle and actually poop daily and feel comfortable in your body and not feel like that overtakes your whole life because it's not fun.
No, it's totally not fun. Food is meant to be. Food is awesome, man.
Yeah, exactly. It's totally is.
So awesome. I love eating. I love cooking. So
Exactly.
Your book, How to Heal Your Metabolism, is one of the best books and the most recommended books I get clients to get. You're writing another book. Am I allowed to tell people that?
You can. Yeah. And interesting enough, a good bit of the new book will be on digestion and blood sugar because it's the two, like I said, it's two of the issues I see that people have the most complications with. So I want to just give them more context, more understanding, you know, really helping them understand all the mechanisms of their blood sugar and of their digestion and why you might have issues and what you can do about it. Because I always believe if people have more insight about how things work, then they can make better choices on foods that can help them. So I'm getting there. It's going to be, you know, hopefully completely finished. I don't know, maybe by the end of the summer. I have been saying it that it keeps going because I keep getting more information. I'm like, oh, that's really important. I need to put that in there.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it was like a 200. It's probably going to be as big as my other book. It's probably going to end up being close to 400 pages again. So, more, you're going to get a good deal. That's all I got to tell you. There's a lot of work that's going to be in this. So, but I think it'll help. It'll help a lot of people with a lot of the questions that I had gotten in the last 10 years. It was kind of my thought. I'm like, okay, let me try to help people understand this better of all the questions I keep getting so that they can continue to go on their path without, if they can't afford to pay for coaching or whatever, that at least they can have more insight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can people work with you? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, they can always contact me via my Instagram or Kate Deering Fitness. I currently am not taking new clients, but I always have a wait list. So if you ever want to come and get on that list, great. I'm happy to, and that depending on what my schedule is, there always can be some new opportunities. But they can get on my Facebook or my Instagram page. I'm always putting out new content.
You put out
sign up on my website. Yeah. So they can also go to my website and sign up for my newsletter that when I'm busy comes out for 2 or 3 months.
Oh, the ebbs and flows of a personal business.
That's right. So many hats that you play, I mean, I know I did hire someone to help me with some of my things, but then I'm like, there's so many different things happening. And certainly when you have a project, if you're doing a course or when you're writing a book, it just kind of consumes you. So
yeah, it's all
not a lot left or anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I find it, because I personally, people find this actually really hard to believe because I'm so organized, but I actually can procrastinate like a mofo.
Yeah, totally.
So when you're writing, like I'm writing my course, you have to go all in. Like sometimes I have to go, like I can only see a certain number of clients. I can only see them on certain days. Like I'm literally can't answer the phone, can't leave the house. I've got to just focus. Like
totally. I clear my schedule and like literally sit in my office. Yeah. And I can still procrastinate. I mean, I can still divert, but then I'm like, okay, I need to get this much done. And then I get hammered into it. And it's just time consuming, It's just the way it is. But
it is. I take my hat off to those people. Like, look at my husband. He's a lawyer and he can jump between, he has to jump between one deal to another deal to another deal. And like, he's so good with his team. I said, Ryan, you never procrastinate. And then he's like, yeah, but see that stack of bills that you keep asking me to look at?
Right. Right.
Like, different. Okay, I'll just do it for you. We all procrastinate somewhere.
Yeah, it happens for sure.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Always good to see you.
I wish that, I wish you were closer.
Right. It's only
just jump over and busy.
Just a 15-hour flight. Come on.
Yeah, over. Right. I just just go get an ice cream or a coffee together.
Totally. That would be great. Do it. Come over.
Don't worry about it. Okay. Thanks so much, babe.
All right. Talk soon.
I'm Lena Lutz, and you've been listening to The Body Never Lies. If you haven't yet, please go to your favourite podcast app and subscribe, rate and review this podcast. All the resources and references from this episode are waiting for you on my website, lelalutz.com. Just click on podcast and look for this episode. Now join me next week for another episode of The Body Never Lies. Thank you so much for listening.